What if depression is not an illness? Now, that's a question I hear quite often. And recently, I've heard someone who I think is a pretty reasonable person say that depression is not an illness. And I think that this is what prompted me to do some Googling and see what other people have to say about this. And I've discovered that there are actually some therapists out there who think that depression is not an illness. And I've listened to all of their arguments, I've read all of their arguments, and they seem quite reasonable, but they are also easy to dismantle. And that's actually what I'm about to do today. So yeah, I guess I just want to share why I personally think that depression is an illness and why it should be treated like one. I have to stress at the beginning that I am not one of the social justice warriors who, get triggered every single time they hear someone mention the idea that depression or any other mental illness might not actually be an illness. I actually have a list of arguments that I would like to share, and I'm not here to, pointlessly scream at you, okay? So let's jump right into it. First of all, I certainly agree with the fact that any mental illness is not really an illness in the standard medical definition of the word, which is a definite pathological process having a characteristic set of signs and symptoms which may affect the whole body or any of its parts, and its etiology, pathology, and prognosis may be known or unknown. To make it a bit simpler, what I'm trying to say is that depression or any other mental illness does not really attack your body, or to be more specific, your tissues, the very same way that, let's say, the flu or cancer would. Now, there are a bunch of arguments, bunch of reasons why some people suggest that depression is not an illness, but it's rather a state of mind, a trait of character, or even worse, a weakness. So I just want to list all of them, and I will, dismantle all of them one by one. First of all, people suggest that the cause of mental health problems has not been pinpointed 100%, and that the mythical chemical imbalance has not been fully confirmed. And that is actually true. That is true. We do not know. We are not sure what exactly is going on in there. It is very likely that depression stems from influences other than the neurotransmitter abnormalities, which is the whole serotonin dopamine thing. And among these are irregularities in brain structure and function, disturbances in neural circuitry, and various psychological contributions such as stress. But I ask, should it really matter? There are other idiopathic diseases, which basically means that their cause is unknown, yet no one denies the fact that these are indeed illnesses. There's also a list of illnesses that can be confirmed, that can be diagnosed only through interviewing the patient, because there are no specific tests that could confirm it, like the restless leg syndrome, but it's still considered an illness. Number 2, some people suggest that medication doesn't work for everyone, so depression cannot be cured, or at least it cannot be kept in check, and that is why it cannot be an illness. But I ask, should it really matter? There are many other illnesses out there for which we don't have treatments that would have a 100% success rate. Now, chemotherapy doesn't always work, but you wouldn't say that cancer is not an illness. There are many other illnesses that cannot be fully cured. We can just try and control the severity of the symptoms. So how is depression any different? Again, and does the fact that not everyone responds well to medicinal treatment, does that mean that we should ditch it altogether? Surely you wouldn't suggest banning chemotherapy just because it doesn't work for everyone. And last but not least, the people who suffer from mental disorders, most of them lead severely impaired lives. Now, these things can be cured or at least kept in check. However, these people won't be able to cope with it unless they seek professional help. Now that, to me, sounds like how an average, more conventional disease would work, doesn't it? When someone breaks a leg, you don't just tell them that if they change their mindset, their bones will instantly heal. When someone is taking insulin shots for diabetes, you don't ask them whether they aren't scared that the medication will change them, and you don't ask them whether they wouldn't prefer to cope with it on their own. When someone has the flu, you don't just tell them to snap out of it and get out of bed. So why would you say those very same things to people who suffer from mental disorders, and disorders that we know, because it has been scientifically proven and it has been documented over the years, these disorders will not go away on their own in most cases. Now, there are people who suggest that depression is not an illness, it's rather a symptom of our consumer culture, the constant rat race, the pressure for perfection imposed upon us by the social media. So I guess the theory is that people who are somehow more emotional, somehow weaker, they can't take it, they can't take the pressure, and as a result, they become depressed. And I say yes, this might be one of the many causes of depression, but I don't think that it's the illness itself. I don't think that this is enough to explain the complexity of depression. Because what about the people who are clinically depressed for no apparent reason? What about the people who actually won the rat race? What about the people who are successful, who are rich, who have it all, who are, considered attractive or whatever, but they are still depressed? And last but not least, what about all of the people who are overly emotional, who are very responsive to what goes on in the world, who care too much, but yet they are not depressed? Now, take me, for example. It's a little bit weird to talk about myself this way, but I am the so-called highly sensitive person. I am very emotional, although I don't really show it on the surface. But I think a lot. I dwell on things inside, and I guess I just I have heightened empathy, which I think is what allows me to make those videos, to make them so relatable, at least according to you. I don't know, but my life hasn't been that easy, to be quite honest, especially for the past couple of months, and somehow I'm not depressed. I'm not. I never was, and I don't feel like I'm about to be. So I think what I want to say is that it's not a general rule. It's not enough. The theory that people that are somehow more emotional are more prone to depression, I don't think that's enough to explain it. I really don't want to go overboard with this, so let me just stress that I think that the feelings of depression, anxiety, stress, or any other unpleasant emotions, they are a part of the human condition. They are normal, they are natural. I don't think that these should be labeled as something bad, as something that is unwanted. I don't think that we should, strive to fully erase these, because that would be absurd. That would be like a real life version of A Brave New World, which is something I really don't want to happen. So also, I believe that getting rid of depression or any other mental illness is in the hands of the person who suffers from the disorder, because that's actually what a lot of therapy is about. And most importantly, I don't think that simply popping a pill every single time is the right way to go. I don't think that over-medicalizing this issue is the one and only and the right solution to this. However, there are times when people cannot cope on their own. They need the help of medication, they need the help of therapy. Sometimes, and I think that actually most times, a mix of these two things works best. So, as you can tell, I'm trying to find a middle ground here, basically having a discussion with myself. But yeah, and to all of the people who suggest that there was no depression in the good old times, I just want to say that Mount Everest wasn't discovered and named by the West until the 1850s, and I'm pretty sure the mountain still existed. Okay? So, to sum up, what I want to say is that I personally don't really care whether mental illnesses are called illnesses, because I know what they are, I know how they should be treated, I know how they work, but there are a lot of people out there who don't know how these work. There are many misconceptions about mental disorders, and I do believe that labeling mental disorders as illnesses has taken so much of the stigma away, which obviously is a good thing. And I guess that being stubborn and just arguing that these are not illnesses just because they don't exactly fit the biological definition of the word illness won't do any good. It can only do harm, because it opens up doors for all of the people who think that it's just a weakness, it's just a trait of character, it's laziness, and saying that it's not an illness basically takes us back to medieval times, and we don't want that. Every time we suggest that it's not an illness, I think we further stigmatize it. I think we somehow suggest that people who suffer from these disorders, they are somehow weaker, that they cannot cope with it on their own. And some people even romanticize depression, and they say that sadness is a good thing in this empty world, and that we should all feel more sadness, and that depression should be somehow nurtured, which is such a ridiculous idea. What I think is worst about this is that when you say that it's not an illness, when you say that, you imply that people who suffer from these disorders should actually be able to cope with them on their own. And when it turns out that not everyone can cope with it on their own, these people become ashamed. And when people become ashamed, they refuse to seek help. And what happens when people refuse to seek help? They often attempt suicide. Now, there is no hidden agenda in this for me. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I am not in any way linked to the pharmaceutical industry. I'm not even depressed, and I never was depressed. So you may be wondering why I am so passionate about this. And, first of all, I just guess I like to discuss various interesting ideas, various interesting topics, but I think that the main reason why I took my understanding of the mental health issues, of the mental health case, what took it to another level was me being diagnosed with social anxiety and me opening up to the world about it. So, when I did it, when I finally had the guts to admit that I was struggling with mental health issues, I was somehow denied by some people the right to suffer from a mental disorder. No matter how hard I tried to explain that, I've been diagnosed both by a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and I actually, took medication for a while, for a very brief while actually. No matter how hard I tried to explain that I actually went to therapy for a year every single week, no matter how hard I tried to explain that maintaining a high-functioning persona online, although I wouldn't really call myself high-functioning, as I think you can clearly tell. But yeah, maintaining an online persona in the comfort of your home, where you can edit out all of the mistakes, where you can put a filter on or whatever, it's not the same as what you would act like around people in real life. And even though I try to explain all of these things, people still had the nerve to say that I am somehow making it up or doing this just to get attention, because clearly for these people these two things don't work. Being online and having social anxiety, these things don't work. So I guess this left me a little bit broken and very much disappointed, because not only did the mental illness itself mess up my life, but the people, the society, when I finally open up about it, they didn't just accept it. They, some people just questioned it at every single opportunity they got. And I guess I just hope that when my children are around and when they need any mental health help, I hope they don't. But if they do, I hope they will instantly get it without having to get humiliated along the way many of us were. And I guess I just hope that in the future people will get help before it's too late. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!